On today's episode, we recap an action-packed first week of finals. We also name our predicted lineups for the upcoming semi-finals, and we take a look at the finals MVP. All that and more on today's episode of Zero Hanger TV. All right, Mitch, so straight into it. Big weekend of finals. We'll kick off first with Thursday night's game with the Pies and the Ds. Not a great one for me. I didn't really enjoy that game, to be perfectly honest, but massive game.
Yeah, it was a great result for Collingwood, obviously, and Demons certainly ruining the chances that they couldn't capitalise on. Beat the Pies with inside 50 entries by a total of 32, which is unprecedented for a losing side. And you know, it was a bit of a Melbourne performance I think we're maybe familiar with from a few years ago before their premiership win, when you had Gorn, Petrarca and Oliver really standing up, but little assistance from other areas of the field. But a lot of the credit does have to go to Collingwood. Just their defensive efforts all night long were absolutely fantastic. Great pressure to start the game as well, particularly in their forward third, and then that really set the tone for them. Didn't need to score in the last quarter I guess, you know, and still held on to the win. So they'll get that break, a much needed break, in a home preliminary final, which every club's obviously after, and obviously the Demons have to take the long road.
Yeah, it's going to be a tricky one, I think, coming up against the next team that beat Sydney. So Carlton and Sydney on the Friday night, massive one.
Yeah, this was always going to be a pretty close one, I thought. Sydney had some great form, and Carlton probably the only side with better form heading into September. Absolutely fantastic for the Blues to get, I guess, the chocolates with similar to, in a way for how Melbourne went. Wasn't necessarily their top line of stars that really got them over the line. They relied on a lot of those role players like your Matt Owies, your Jack Martins, and Matt Cottrell was absolutely fantastic. Probably the best game of his career. Pop up for a few goals. Sam Walsh was absolutely sublime. Blake Acres as well at both ends of the field on that wing too. And yeah, just their first obviously final showing in a decade, but to get the win as well was absolutely fantastic for Michael Voss, and they certainly could head into week 2 as favourites.
Yeah, I mean, coming into this season, you would have thought that just making finals was a pass for Michael Voss and the Blues, but to win one was just another level.
No, there's certainly a chance.
Yeah, all right. And the next game, obviously the Saints and GWS, pretty impressive performance from GWS.
Yeah, that
away from home too.
Yeah, that orange tsunami, which is what they've talked about all year under Adam Kingsley, was really put the Saints to the test. Their run, their spread, their contested ball. Their backline stood up really tall. Their forwards certainly took some of their chances, and their small forwards really got to work. But it was Tom Green and Josh Kelly through midfield. Even guys like Finn Callahan, I thought really stood up in his first final. But Green and Kelly really led the way with that balance of contested work and outside runs. So just overcame the Saints, who a lot can say that they did really well to get to September. I think they'll take a home final. They didn't get the win and probably let down a few fans, but I don't think many, especially myself, had them playing September. Even only a few rounds left in the season, a lot of them had them falling out. They held firm and certainly took a lot of positives away from this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And heading over to the Gabba, probably what we all sort of predicted with the Lions sort of running away with that one against Port.
Yeah, if there was going to be one result that was probably going to be favoured heavily to one side, it was likely looking like Saturday night's game, and that's kind of how it panned out. I think what was really great for the Lions was that it was another performance where Lachie Neale got tagged out, but they had all these players step up to the occasion. Hugh McCluggage, the standout among their midfield group. Josh Dunkley still went to work and did what he did best, but their forwards as well. You look at Cam Rayner and Jasper Fletcher popping up for 2-3 goals each. Joe Danaher kicking 5 is going to be great for his confidence for the home preliminary final in a couple of weeks' time. And for Port Adelaide, obviously, I think they're just coming up against a better side. They're probably in that bracket below the Pies and the Lions, and they're with Melbourne, maybe even one below Melbourne, but they've still got a great chance. They'll return home, play the Giants this week, and they've got the cattle to go all the way, I think, but it's certainly going to be very hard for them with the next couple of games if they can progress, and what they'll have to deal with in the next few weeks.
Yep, absolutely. So it was a pretty busy weekend for the MRO as well.
Yeah, a lot to take out of the first week. Obviously, Braden Maynard's case is probably the headline act of what was a very busy, opening weekend for finals in what was away from the field. His collision with Angus Brayshaw referred straight to the tribunal by the MRO in conjunction with AFL's new executive general manager, Laura Kane. So that was quite an interesting outcome. But yeah, a minimum 3-game ban is what the AFL are pressing for. Obviously, Collingwood are going to be looking to clear him for their home preliminary final. And there's no in-between, really, with how we can, I guess, how the outcome of this case can take place. So severe, careless and high leads to that, I guess, direct referral. And all that they can really argue is that the AFL will argue that it was severe and it was careless, and then obviously the piles will go elsewhere. So that'll either mean he's off scot-free, 0 games, or he gets 3 games or even more. I've certainly come around, I think, to the idea that he probably should be playing in that preliminary final. Whether he will be, I don't think so, though. That the tribunal hasn't been all too sympathetic for players who have gone into bumping actions, even though Maynard opted to protect himself, and if any other option, he still could have likely taken out Brayshaw and concussed him and maybe even hurt himself. So protecting the player protecting themselves hasn't really worked all too often this year. And the duty of care that will get raised in the tribunal hearing is unlikely to work in Maynard's favour. So I'm not expecting him to get off. I think he should. I think in an ideal world he gets 1 week, but it's just not how the system works. So that was the first big case. A couple others, Jacob Van Rooyen, 1-game suspension as we film at the moment, yet to make a call to Demons. I'd be very surprised if he's playing this weekend, though, whether they do challenge or there's a good chance that they accept.
Yep.
And then Jack Martin's the other one. So they're heading to the tribunal, 2-game ban. I don't see him getting off. The Blues can certainly make a case that maybe it wasn't high level of impact and maybe it was medium, so that would make it a 1-game suspension. But very hard to argue, trying to tackle someone with a closed fist. I think he's probably looking at least a game. Ben certainly could stick with 2 at the tribunal, so it's going to be a big one to watch as well.
Yeah, pretty spicy one at the MRO this week. I'm going to stay out of it because I got suspended from Twitter this week for giving my opinion. So moving on to the predictions for the upcoming semi-finals. So we have our predicted lineups. Yep. So Melbourne.
Yeah, so these will be interesting. As we mentioned, Van Rooyen likely suspended, or in this case, all we can go off at the moment is that he is suspended, and then add that to Brayshaw's concussion. That'll at least force 2 changes. So what we're probably expecting is another forward to come in, and at the moment, Harrison Petty and Jake Melksham out for the year. Ben Brown's been battling knee soreness. It really looks like Brodie Grundy could be the man. They've got Josh Shackey and Matt Jefferson, some younger guys, but I think Brodie Grundy's going to be the one that's coming in for Van Rooyen. And then you look at, I guess, that Brayshaw absence. James Jordan's probably the most suitable, I think, to take his spot. Can play inside and out as well as on a flank. And maybe Bailey Laurie just holds the tactical sub role. So they're the kind of 2 changes we had for Melbourne. For the Blues, similar. Mackay out through concussion, and you've got Jack Martin facing suspension. So what we can probably go off is that there'll be 2 forced changes for the Blues as well. So I think what you look at is if Jack Silvani's fit, he'll come in for Mackay. It looks like he's going to be an absolute great chance to be playing on Friday night. And then the other one is, Martin's absence. So maybe Jesse Motlop comes into the starting side from that tactical sub role, and then maybe someone like Paddy Dow goes into that 23rd man role. They've got Matt Kennedy, Zach Fisher, Corey Durden, Ollie Hollands. They've got a lot of options to pick from for the sub or for Martin's place. But I think, Motlop gets the starting role for that one. Port Adelaide, now they've got a few injury concerns. Trent McKenzie rolled his ankle. Dill Williams with a hamstring concern. You can maybe expect both of those guys to miss. Add in the mix that Charlie Dixon's on his way back, and that's going to add a bit of a conundrum, and I'll get to that in a sec. But for McKenzie, there's no real obvious option to replace him. They don't have Tom Jonas due to a calf injury. Tom Cleary's season's over, so do they just rely on Miles Bergman to play a bit taller and take on someone like Jake Riccardi? Or a bit left field, do they swing Jeremy Finlayson back? Now, when he was at the Giants, he played some time in defence and had some pretty good stints with them. Now, when you're bringing Charlie Dixon back in, you can't have, I think, him, Finlayson, Ollie Lord, who brewed 4 goals and would be pretty stiff to get dropped.
Yeah, it's too tall.
And Todd Marshall as well. So, too tall. Do they throw one of them back? And probably the most suitable one would be Finlayson. So, changes we got, Dixon comes back in. He's expected to, still needs to pass some, fitness tests, but he'd be coming in. I think you put Francis Evans as sub. Travis Boak comes from the sub into the starting lineup. So you've got Dixon and Boak into the 22 for Mackenzie and Williams, maybe flagging that Finlayson plays back, and then Francis Evans comes up into the sub. Last one as well as GWS, who are in a fantastic position, given they haven't really had injury troubles too much this year, or at least at the right time. A lot of their previous seasons, they've really battled on the injury front, particularly in some of those years when they were making a push for the premiership. Obviously lost Stephen Cornelio to an eye injury, so he had blurred vision on match day and was a late out for Xavier O'Halloran. He'll probably undergo more tests, pardon me, in the week before likely being cleared to play. So what do the Giants do with the side that, handled St Kilda quite comfortably? I think O'Halloran maybe falls back to the sub role and Cornelio comes in. What that means for tactical sub Nick Haynes is an interesting one. I think it will depend on matchups, but he certainly could also land a role in the starting 22. And I think you drop Lockie Keefe out. Keefe, played in that utility role against St Kilda, couldn't really get much of an impact, mostly played forward in the forward half of the field. And I think from a matchups point of view, if they want a bit taller in the back line, when maybe with Nick Haynes' probably better suited to a backline role than Keefe, I would say, then I think that's probably going to be a good matchup for Port Adelaide's forwards. If they want to kind of go a bit taller in attack though, and kind of outsize Port Adelaide's defence, then maybe Keefe could be one that they deploy forward again. So they're the kind of changes that the Giants will be weighing up.
Yep. And in terms of the finals fixture, so D's and Blues on Friday night at the G, and then we've got Port to host GWS on Saturday night at the Adelaide Oval. So winners, who have you got?
I think Melbourne are going to beat the Blues. There's going to be a lot of focus on their forward 50 entries again, as there has been for most of the back end of this season. It's going to be really close. I think I tipped in our finals crystal ball piece that there might be an extra time game this postseason. If there is, maybe this is probably the one I'd be putting my money on for a draw and some extra time. It's going to be really close, but I'm tipping the D's to do it. And then in the other game, it's going to be really hard to go past. I think Port Adelaide's recent win over GWS at Adelaide Oval was only round 22, and they won by 51 points. Quite a convincing performance. The Giants didn't have Brent Daniels and Toby Bedford, who are two really important players. They might just be those small forward roles, but two really important players to their system and their spread. So it's probably not going to be a 50-point loss, but I'm tipping Port Adelaide.
Yeah, I agree. Both ones. Going to be a pretty tight contest, I think, all around. All right. So moving on now to the losers who dropped out of the first week of finals. So where to now we'll start with the Saints.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. As we mentioned before, I think it's a really successful season for them. Ross Lyon comes back. The players he's got, probably not a final side, but he was able to implement what he wanted to from a coaching standpoint and tactics standpoint. He's brought in some staff that are going to help him do that, and they've been able to, across the year, steer themselves to a top 8 finish, which, not a lot of people would have had, I would have thought. So that's a big tick for them. They got a lot of good looks at some young talent. You look at your Philippou, your Owens. Wangani Miller has been absolutely fantastic for them, and I think he might be the pick of the bunch, as good as Owens has been. And then you add, Windhager into that mix as well. Kuba Sharman looked pretty good in the loss to GWS, so they've got some good younger options there. But they're going to be looking at a lot of off-season change. I think they've got 14 players currently off contract at the end of now they're in the off season. I think 9 of those played 6 or less games. A couple with obviously just sidelined for most of the year, but a lot of that off contract weight didn't get a great look this year, and that could spell a few changes for them. Ross Lyon kind of flagged in these post-game presser that they want to get some near-term assistance. That they're planning for the long term, but they still want to get some near-term assistance and add to their list with some talent that can probably help their midfield. Also kind of touched on Jack Steele kind of being that lone hand midfielder on Saturday afternoon. So that's one direction they want to head in, but Lyons also flagged before that they want to be at the top end of the draft. They want to be getting good early selections in. When you're a finals team, you're not gifted them. So they're starting at pick 12, which could bounce out to pick 15, 16 after match bids. So they're not going to be in that mix. They're going to have to trade in to get there. And if they're wanting to trade good players in, if they also want to get to the top of the draft order, then they're going to have to trade good players out. So it's a real balancing act for St Kilda, and certainly going to be an interesting one to watch with Ross Lyon now at his first off-season. He joined the Saints after the trade period last year, and so this year he'll be able to pull a few strings and hopefully get what he wants heading into 2024.
Yeah, big tick for the Saints this year. And how about Sydney? So made the premiership last year and now just bowing out of finals in the first week.
Such an interesting read, the Swans. Like you said, grand final finishes last year. They'll be a bit disappointed with how things finished, I guess, this year. But at the same time, they were a bottom four side at round 15 or 16 and really willed themselves on that win streak to book a top 8 finish. They've got, I think, a lot of the pieces there for their next, premiership side. They're a really young team. They're not as reliant, I think, on someone like Luke Parker, and weren't as reliant on Buddy this year as they have been in previous years. So finding that replacement for Buddy Franklin's going to be an interesting one. I don't think they have an obvious player who's just going to fill that role. I think they're going to get a lot out of the likes of Amati, McDonald, and McLean. McLean being one of the best players for the Swans in that loss to Carlton. So I think those three will share the workload, and one of them certainly could be in for a breakout campaign next year, or even two of them, and that could be a way to fill that void. The other one they want to, but more of the other options that they're going to look at in the off-season will be a ruckman with Tom Hickey retired and Peter Laddams not always able to be up for selection, and a key defender as well is the other critical ones. Ben Mackay's one they want to look at. Obviously they'll lose Paddy McCartan to retirement. So Brodie Grundy, Ben Mackay, some big names that they probably want to get in the door. Whether they can get both, I'm not sure, but they're probably the two areas that they'll be looking for to add to, and hopefully, back in September next year. Like I said, it's a young list. I think they're only going to go a step further next season, so maybe a finals win or a return to the top 4.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Well, now moving over to finish up, we're going to take a look at our finals MVP. So quick brief, how does the finals MVP work?
Yeah, so obviously pretty much the same as our regular season, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 votes from 4 panellists. So best one player can get in a game is 20 votes. It's obviously going to be quite interesting with some teams not playing this week and some teams only playing 1 or 2 or 3 games, and one club's able to play 4 if they can. So much like the Gary Ayres Award, it can kind of skew in favour of the clubs that take the long way. But more often than not, it's probably a player that's winning the premiership and getting a lot of votes on grand final day to cap off a decent finals run that's probably going to win. It's going to be quite interesting to see how our own votes kind of pan out over the next 3 weeks.
Yep. And so who have we got at the top of the leaderboard?
Quite interesting start. 4 standouts, 4 players, all getting 20 votes. So obviously all of our panellists saw the same player from each game as the unanimous, MVP. So what we had in a tied lead at the moment is Max Gawn, Sam Walsh, Tom Green, and Hugh McCluggage. Gawn's done fantastic well, obviously, to get 20 votes in a losing side. And as I mentioned before, that might bode well for him long-term in this votes, because he'll play this week, and then if he wins and performs well, adds votes, then he'll play in a preliminary final. Even if he doesn't lose that's 3 games. Collingwood, for example, will play over the weekend. Will play in a preliminary final and maybe play in a grand final. So that's equally 3 games. So just going through a few of them, Gawn, Walsh, Green, and McCluggage tied in first on 20 votes each. Behind them, Steele Sideboard and Josh Kelly on 16. Joe Danaher got 15 votes for his 5-goal performance, and then Akers 13, Cam Rayner, Errol Goulden, and Bobby Hill with 12 each. So it's going to be obviously pretty tight because there's only 4 weeks of voting. So it's going to be quite interesting to see if we have a breakout, player after the first 2 weeks, which, if one player can put up consecutive best on ground performances, and that's going to probably hold them pretty well over the course of a month. And then just some of the breakdowns as well. The Lions polled 79 of a possible 80 votes against Brisbane. Connor Rozee managed to pinch 1 vote for the night. Akers, Walsh, Cottrell, Goulden, and McLean were the only players to poll in the Blues Swans game. So usually you might get some variation, but all 4 panellists voted on the exact same 5 players, not in the same order necessarily, but were all seen as top 5 players. Blues and Swans voting was 44 to 36 in favour of the Blues. Demons 27 votes to Collingwood's 33, so 20 of those 27 votes were Max Gawn's, but a few Collingwood players shared it around a little bit. I think that was Hill and Sidebottom leading the way. I think Hoskin Elliott got a vote or 2 here and there as well. So a few for the Pies, and then GWS 69 to St Kilda's 11. So as expected, mostly in favour of the Giants. I think Jack Steele, Rowan Marshall, were among those to get some votes for the Saints in the loss.
Yep, interesting stuff. All right. Well, that wraps it up for today's episode of Zero Hanger TV. Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, Phoenix.
And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to have a lot of content coming out this final series, trade period and draft period. And don't forget, you can catch all the latest AFL news at zerohanger.com.